Before Christopher Nolan, this was Batman. Yes, a latex-clad brawler with prominent nipples and heavy eyeliner.
Nice.
On June 20th, 1997, Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin hit theaters, turning the franchise into bright neon kitsch. The film was stylish and quite erotic, but most of the jokes were purely cringeworthy. It was almost immediately dubbed one of the biggest blockbuster flops of its time.
If there's anybody watching this that went into Batman and Robin with great anticipation, if I disappointed them in any way, then I really want to apologize, because it wasn't my intention. My intention was just to entertain them.
The financial blow to Warner Brothers was so severe that they were too scared to bring up Batman for a long time. However, when they eventually opened up to reboot ideas, the proposals frightened them further. Imagine Clint Eastwood playing Bruce Wayne.
You're kidding me.
Then picture him living on the streets. Relocate him to Tokyo's alleys. Still name the city Gotham. Get rid of Alfred entirely. Substitute him with Big Al, an African-American mechanic who shelters Bruce following his parents' murder. This idea came across as Taxi Driver wrapped in a bat costume. It originated from the creator of that famous 2-hour narcotic commercial. Yet, Darren Aronofsky realized on his own that this vision was doomed to fail.
I don't think I was the right guy at the right time. It was rated R. It was definitely, I think, a whole world of superhero films had to first come out to scrape the bottom of that barrel before they would go to rated R films like some of the later ones.
Absolutely not. Children purchase Batman action figures. Movie studios adore selling Batman merchandise. Executives strongly dislike R-rated Batman films featuring a semi-crazy urban Avenger brought up by a grease monkey. Various other candidates were suggested. The Wachowski siblings briefly developed their own version before abandoning it to shoot the Matrix follow-ups. Consequently, Batman plunged straight back into pre-production limbo. The character could have remained stuck there permanently were it not for the movie Troy. Indeed, that specific Troy, Brad Pitt rocking sandals. Legolas stripped of his archery gear. In a bizarre twist of fate, that historical epic rescued the Caped Crusader. Previously, in 2002, Wolfgang Petersen had recently directed Air Force One and The Perfect Storm, prompting Warner Brothers to grant him nearly $200 million without hesitation. He was heavily immersed in pre-production when he unexpectedly abandoned the project to focus on Batman v Superman. This situation left the production company with a vacant director's seat for Troy. Enter Christopher Nolan. Having just wrapped Insomnia, he arrived with glowing endorsements from Al Pacino and Robin Williams. The executives at Warner took a chance on the up-and-coming filmmaker and handed him the reins for Troy. Nolan dedicated several months to pre-production and was completely ready to begin filming. However, Petersen's comic book adaptation collapsed. He intended to depict an older, retired Batman battling a separated Superman in a grim, R-rated, ultra-violent slaughterhouse, which was the primary cause for the cancellation of both this and prior reboot attempts. Petersen did not accept rejection easily. He insisted on reclaiming Troy, which practically ousted Nolan from his massive career opportunity. So, how did Warner Brothers resolve this conflict with Nolan? They presented him with the chance to reinvent the Batman franchise, since absolutely nothing has ever backfired with that specific concept, correct? Fortunately for the studio, Nolan had no desire for 1990s-style rubber nipples or a massive bloodbath. He aimed to apply his skills to a genre he had already mastered, a psychological detective thriller. However, there was a single complication. Nolan was not heavily invested in comic book culture.
I've always been a big fan of the character, but I am by no means any kind of comic book expert. I felt I needed a writer on the project who really knew the character inside out, really knew the comic world.
Warner brought on David Goyer, the writer who essentially birthed the gritty comic book adaptation with films like The Crow and Blade.
My mother, when I was a kid, that I was going to go to Hollywood one day and do a Batman film. And in a way, I'd been waiting my whole life for this call.
Alongside production designer Nathan Crowley, they isolated themselves in Nolan's actual home garage, forging the narrative and sticking concept sketches on the walls.
I had to take the day off when the cleaner came around because they'd leave the dryers on.
7 weeks following this, inside that very same garage, they held a gathering with the studio's top executives to read the lone hard copy of the screenplay.
After we finished the script, no photocopies were made for the executives at Warner Brothers. They came to Chris's house and sat in that same garage. They brought in some couches and read the script there.
Why hold it in the garage? Well, if you are aware of how traditional Nolan is, you only know a fraction of the truth. The man borders on paranoia, actively avoids utilizing a smartphone, and lacks a private email address. However, the studio heads put up with it, and their patience was justified. Nolan cracked the exact dilemma that the prior creators could not. The narrative was gripping and adult-oriented, yet it steered clear of any R-rating elements. Nolan clarified that he did not wish to alienate preteens. He intended to craft the exact type of cinematic experience he would have adored at that young age. The tale of his beginnings had never been fully explored in cinema or truly even on the comic pages, but it remains vague regarding his specific activities and encounters during that time frame. Thus, the screenplay proved effective. The Caped Crusader was finally greenlit. Consequently, Warner Brothers awarded Nolan a massive $150 million budget. Instantly, however, the executives began to fret. They had just handed a massive sum to an independent filmmaker, and they desperately needed a surefire commercial star. Their genius thought for the main character? Ashton Kutcher. No joking. Nolan was attempting to construct a dark, mind-bending crime drama. Meanwhile, the corporate bosses wanted the host of Punk'd wearing the iconic cowl. Nolan firmly refused. He persuaded them that casting a comedic performer would instantly ruin the atmosphere of the project. The executives relented, kicking off one of the most insane actor hunts in Hollywood's past. They considered virtually everyone, ranging from seasoned star David Duchovny to an emerging talent named Heath Ledger. Ledger and Nolan genuinely discussed the role and mutually concluded that playing Bruce Wayne simply did not suit him. They parted amicably and vowed to collaborate on a different project in the future. Nolan whittled the candidates down to half a dozen men. Included was Goyer's top choice, Jake Gyllenhaal. The group also featured Henry Cavill, Billy Crudup, and Joshua Jackson. Finally, there were two performers who utterly astonished everyone present, Cillian Murphy and Christian Bale.
Same way that people were telling me, hey, you can't go play Patrick Bateman, it's career suicide. Other people also said, you know, if you play Batman, that's it. You're never going to play anything else again. You will always be Batman. And I went, bring it on. Let's see if that happens. Because I just always felt like, look, if I don't have the skill to be able to rise above that, then I don't deserve to.
Nolan was unable to make a decision based solely on audition tapes, so he forced all of them into an extensive on-camera trial. Nolan nie zmig wyznaczytisa. Proste переглядаючи відеозаписи, тому відправив усіх кандидатів на масштабні візуальні проби.
We shot it on the Warner's lot, I think, and everyone, like, you could see I knew the other guys that were auditioning, and I knew that Christian Bale was the obvious choice.
When I first met Christian, he was extraordinarily thin.
It was something that Chris was a little concerned about because they did have to screen test for Batman, and it was pretty close on the heels of finishing on The Machinist. So I was really stick thin, and I had to try and put on weight as quickly as possible so that, he could convince, the studio that I was somebody worth considering seriously.
I was just stuffing my face all day long and lifting heavy weights and eventually went up to like 220 pounds. I could see the look on Chris's face, he looked at me and it was like, oh, Christ, what has this guy done?
Bale completely obliterated his rivals. However, Cillian Murphy proved to be so profoundly spellbinding that Nolan awarded him the part of the Scarecrow immediately. That outcome turned out to be a massive disaster avoided for all of us. Prior to Murphy entering the room, the studio executives were firmly resolved to cast Marilyn Manson as the primary antagonist. Nolan was simultaneously auditioning for the secondary characters, targeting exclusively top-tier celebrities. But recall his intense secrecy? He was highly anxious that the screenplay would find its way to the public. Consequently, he abstained from informing the cast about the actual movie they were preparing to make. He distributed the pages using the fake moniker, The Intimidation Game. Michael Caine reviewed his script and honestly believed he was joining a dark crime drama set in Britain. He solely consented to portray Alfred due to his immense respect for Nolan's directorial skills. Furthermore, that admiration went both ways. Since his involvement in Batman, Sir Michael Caine has featured in virtually all of Nolan's cinematic releases. Whenever the executives pushed for Lawrence Fishburne to take the Lucius Fox role, David Goyer quickly rejected the idea. He had crafted that specific character visualizing only one performer, Morgan Freeman. Freeman, in reality, was a massive Batman geek who had been digesting the comic issues since age 9. Surprisingly, though, he was completely unaware of Lucius Fox's existence until he perused Goyer's drafted pages. Regarding Rachel Dawes, that character was entirely absent from comic lore and was generated expressly for Katie Holmes. Initially, Nolan desired his lead from Memento, Guy Pearce, to embody Henri Ducard, yet the executives rejected the choice. Pearce simply lacked the age required to serve as a convincing paternal mentor. Therefore, they approached Gary Oldman. Oldman boasted a filmography loaded with legendary crazy villains. This decision left the role of Ducard completely unoccupied, granting Liam Neeson the opportunity to claim it. The excellent aspect of Liam's casting is that he eventually portrays a key antagonist. Moreover, he had never stepped into the shoes of a bad guy previously. He is typically known for portraying warm, uncle-like guiding figures, a persona he is required to establish early in this picture. However, when his character transforms, the shift is incredibly profound. Add in a couple of brief appearances by Nolan's relative and his former independent movie colleagues, and the cast list was firmly finalized. On the eve of production, Nolan gathered his whole crew and compelled them to view Blade Runner. As the final text scrolled, he instructed them that this was exactly the aesthetic their version of Gotham required. He went as far as casting Rutger Hauer to solidify that specific atmosphere. Yet, how does one manage to create such intense authenticity within a fictional metropolis? Primarily by capturing Gotham using the practical avenues of London, New York, and predominantly Chicago. This strategy bestowed the imaginary location with a sense of intimate realism. To accomplish a comparable outcome for the Batcave, the production team had to take even more drastic measures. During the 1990s, the hideout was merely a combination of several set pieces and massive painted backgrounds. However, for this new iteration, they dedicated 10 months constructing a physical version inside the largest airplane hangar on Earth. Returning to the city limits, however, as you might guess, filming with practical effects naturally incurs significant expenses. Nolan conceptualized the fresh Batmobile, dubbed the Tumbler, as a hybrid cross of a Hummer and a Lamborghini sports car. It appeared intimidating, yet the true horror lay in navigating it across Chicago's roadways. It generated enormous gridlocks simply because the professional drivers had to move at a creeping pace to ensure they didn't flatten regular commuters' vehicles. A collision occurred regardless when an intoxicated motorist crashed into it, harboring the genuine belief that the Batmobile was a hostile extraterrestrial vessel. As a brief trivia point, Bruce Wayne's regular civilian transport in the film happens to be a Lamborghini. Liam Neeson is a massive individual. Throughout the martial arts instructional scenes, the crew was forced to position the background actors on crates so that Neeson didn't appear excessively gigantic. As filming concluded, Nolan simply instructed him to hunch over, yet the true brilliance of the combat scenes resided in the cinematography. Nolan captured the brawls from the viewpoint of the antagonists. He desired the viewers to experience the absolute dread of being stalked by a terrifying entity in the shadows. Save for the times you are observing the massive swarm of bats called by the sonic device, this intense focus on practicality even influenced the combat sequences, producing several comical planning headaches. Once principal photography commenced in the spring of 2004, Nolan shattered all the conventional guidelines for massive budget films. With a $150 million allowance, production companies invariably deploy a supplementary crew to handle dangerous stunts and secondary footage, while the primary director concentrates on the leading cast. Nolan utterly rejected this practice. He insisted on maintaining direct authority over every individual shot, relying exclusively on his director of photography, Wally Pfister. Furthermore, he reduced computer-generated imagery to the lowest conceivable level. But there was one glaring issue that couldn't fix: the suit. Just like Michael Keaton in the 80s, Christian Bale's Batman physically couldn't turn his head. The helmet Batman was so stiff that Bale had to pivot his entire torso just to look around. Instead of trying to hide this limitation, Nolan and his stunt coordinators leaned into it. They adopted a brutal real-world fighting method called Keysi. It wasn't about flashy, cinematic high kicks. It was all about tight claustrophobic strikes using elbows and knees, and functional use of the suit, such as spikes on the forearms and reinforced armor. It made Batman fight less like a ninja and more like a fighter in high-tech armor. And then there was the voice. Bale didn't just want to sound intimidating. He wanted to sound like a literal monster to differentiate Batman from Bruce Wayne completely. He pushed his vocal cords to the absolute limit. During filming, Bale would perform that guttural, terrifying growl with such ferocity that he repeatedly lost his voice on set. While Nolan slightly tweaked the frequencies in post-production to give it an extra unnatural bass, the core of that sheer throat-shredding aggression was all Bale. To construct this harsh environment, Nolan required the appropriate audio landscape. He reached out to Hans Zimmer. Zimmer consented, yet he carried a single stipulation. He insisted on bringing James Newton Howard into the fold. They divided the scoring duties to parallel the split personality of Bruce Wayne, and Bruce decided on driving Lamborghinis. Observe the musical album. Each track is titled after a specific type of bat. Should you string together the initial characters of tracks 4 through 9, they actually spell the word Batman. Thus, the picture was recorded, pieced together, and marketed utilizing an unprecedented $100 million budget. The executives at Warner placed their faith in Nolan's ability and found themselves thoroughly satisfied. The dramatic flair left a significant mark. Granted, the picture grossed merely $370 million, and judging by contemporary blockbuster benchmarks, that does not represent a massive windfall given the inflated manufacturing and promotional costs. Nevertheless, the corporate heads refrained from panicking, and their composure was justified. Nolan's obsession with practical effects didn't stop at street level. Take the climactic monorail sequence. In any other 2005 blockbuster, that entire finale would have been rendered inside a computer. Not for Nolan. The crew built a sprawling, highly detailed 1/3 scale miniature of Gotham City and an actual massive model train. When the monorail crashes through the parking garage and plummets to the ground, you are watching a real physical object being destroyed on camera. It was old-school Hollywood magic wrapped in a modernity. The reception from critics was exceptionally positive. It ranked as the most highly praised Batman cinematic outing ever made, and Wally Pfister even secured an Academy Award nod for his camera work. The hidden strength of the picture lay in its grounding in reality. It delved profoundly into the mental state of Bruce Wayne, successfully rendering his driving forces credible. It presented such a realistic and harsh tone that it subsequently motivated the handlers of the James Bond franchise to completely revamp 007 a 12-month later. The entertainment industry was left in awe. They found it hard to fathom that an inexperienced filmmaker possessed the courage to craft a massive summer spectacle perfectly aligned with his personal vision. Nolan practically handled this $150 million corporate anchor exactly like one of his early, low-budget independent features. He abstained from hunting for executive validation or yielding to test audience preferences. During his independent filmmaking period, he was required to be his primary motivator, given that nobody gave a damn whether he concluded his projects or failed. He injected that identical, unyielding energy into the Batman project. He forged the cinematic experience he personally longed to witness, purely because he believed it was necessary for it to be created. From Nolan's perspective, whenever you build something entirely fueled by passion, you simply do not second-guess it.